Thank you, Emerson. Thanks so much for reading. Well, before I give an introduction to our speaker tonight, I thought I would just take a moment to give a quick introduction to myself. My name is Chris Heckert, and I'm a grateful alcoholic. Good to be with you all. And tonight is my first time hosting this meeting. I just celebrated 12 years of sobriety on May 24th, just a week or so ago. But a year ago, like many of you, things were shut down and I was really, really struggling in every way, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And I reached out to an AA friend and I said, what are you doing? Most meetings are shut down. And she said, hey, there are a lot of Zoom meetings out there. You really ought to check out this amazing meeting on Thursdays. And she sent me the code and I logged on for the first time. And the speaker that night spoke right to me, right to my soul, exactly what I needed to hear. But what also really struck me was this funny, brutally honest, charismatic host named Sam. Now, I've only missed a couple of these meetings over the past year, and I had courage about a month after I was logging on to reach out to Sam Glenn, the host. And ultimately, I asked Sam if he would be my sponsor, and lucky for me, I don't know about him, Sam has been my sponsor, working the steps with me for about a year. And I've seen him on here for a year hosting and sharing a little bit, but I have been very, very interested myself in him having more significant time to open up than just be the host. And so it is a great privilege for me to be in this meeting, to be your host tonight, but especially to introduce Sam G tonight. Sam, take it away.
What's up? Thanks, Chris. Hey, everybody. I'm Sam. I'm an alcoholic. I still haven't found, my wife and I just moved into this new house a few months ago, or actually since September, but I still haven't found my proper Zoom spot, so I don't know where I look the best. And then I was going to wear my white linen shirt, but it was a little too wrinkly, my spiritual shirt, because spiritual people wear white linen. So, there's a lot of people who I really, really love on this meeting. And it started as something small that I did with the guys that I sponsor. And then it grew into the Zoom thing during COVID. And then we opened it up, and then Tom helped me, and we started getting all kind of speakers on here and amazing people, and started recording the conversations. And I think what makes this topic so interesting is I'm gonna qualify myself a little bit. I got sober when I was 18 years old, December 5th of 99. My home group is the Backroom Group. My sponsor is Tom Yu from Santa Fe. And, I have been sober now over half my life. I've been at this thing for a long time. I come from a long line of alcoholism. Both my parents were alcoholics. My mom was an alcoholic. My mom's dad was an alcoholic. He died from alcoholism. My dad was an alcoholic. His dad was an alcoholic. I mean, like, everybody in my family is either crazy or an alcoholic. So, and they're either sober or they're not sober. There's not a lot of in between, or they're in a cult or something, So, here's a little part that I think is important. Like, when I got here, I've been going, so I grew up in Alcoholics Anonymous. I grew up going to clubhouses in AA. I grew up around people. I grew up around this fellowship. And when I was a kid, I definitely believe in the family aspect of alcoholism and the repercussions of the family part of alcoholism. My parents were divorced for 9 years. They got remarried after they got remarried when I was 11, and they got remarried because they were trying to get me to act right. All throughout elementary school, through all this divorce and all this stuff. I had developed this terrible anxiety disorder called obsessive compulsive disorder that's still with me today. And it manifests itself by having these just terrible intrusive thoughts. And it's so weird because I didn't grow up in a religious household, but I grew up in the Bible Belt, and all these, and it's like a real diagnosable, like neurological disorder. And I would start having all these intrusive thoughts about things that I was afraid of. And, and I watched a lot of trashy TV. So, and I caught a lot of scary stuff, and my imagination got filled with it, and it would kind of vomit it back out in this thing that would really make me anxious. Like I'll give you an example. One time I was watching America's Most Wanted, and there's these serial killer devil worshiper people. And all of a sudden my brain goes, well, what if you're a devil worshiper? And I think I was like 7 or 8, and I was at the lake house, and I told my dad, I go, Dad, I'm afraid I might be a devil worshiper. He goes, oh, you're not a devil worshiper, son. And I go, God, please don't let me be a devil worshiper. I'm a good Christian boy. And it just, those intrusive thoughts kept coming up. And the more I compulsed to make myself feel better, and the more reassurance I got, the worse they got. So when the big book talks about being restless, irritable, and discontent, we know that alcoholics only have 2 major problems with alcohol. One is when we drink it, and the other is when we don't drink it. And for me, my major problem is when I don't drink it. And then I also have all this other weird shit on top of it that makes it really hard. I remember when I was a kid, my dad and I were fishing, and he was cutting up some bait, and all of a sudden I saw this vision of me stabbing my dad to death. It was like a beautiful day, and this vision in my head, this anxious thing goes, what if you took that knife, and what if you cut him? It was awful. And I was a child, and I kept that secret. And my point in saying all this stuff is that it made me so crazy that I checked myself impatient to a place at 11 years old. And they decided that what I had was obsessive compulsive disorder, that it's where you have reoccurring intrusive thoughts regarding harming stuff that you're afraid of, stuff that you'd never do, and that I had a pretty tender conscience with a lot of that stuff. And the reason I tell you this, because a lot of it revolved around religion. I had all this religious stuff, and then as you grow in education, you grow in a lot of other areas. Or as I grew, because I was so freaked out by it, I studied it a lot, and the thoughts got more and more complex and weird. And like I would always have these I just had these crazy thoughts where, like if I went to church, anything revolving stuff spiritually really pissed me off, because my brain would just be like, oh man, the one thing you don't want to do is piss God off, blah, blah, blah. My brain would start going, well, God can kiss my ass, like what if, and I'd be like, oh God, please forgive me for that. And he goes, you know what else he can do? He can blah, 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 and I mean, it went a lot worse. And then I would be like, God, I'm so sorry. So, by the time I was 12, I needed a drink. And what that gave me was some relief from the bondage of self. And I struggled as a kid with a lot of problems, like when I was in first grade, I was engaged to several different girls, and they all found out about it. Like they were all standing around the playground, and I'd given them all these fake rings and my mom's jewelry boxes, et cetera, et cetera. And those kind of problems continued throughout my life too. But I also got put in several behavior disorder programs. I was a skater punk. I wanted to skateboard. I wanted to have tattoos. All my heroes were these, rock stars back in the 80s. And, and I hid this other anxiety disorder inside. And so, one of the things that I've learned in the program of AA is that alcoholics, don't have a problem with alcohol. They have a problem that only alcohol seems to solve. And so by the time I washed up the last time on the shores of AA, I was standing outside of a meeting. I'd been drunk the night before. I had gotten a girl pregnant in rehab school. I dropped out of school. By the time I was 18, I'd been to 2 treatment centers, 2 mental institutions, getting ready to go back to another one from this OCD stuff. And I was a high school dropout, and that was not how I wanted my life to be. And you see these people who are on the side of the road selling the paper. I don't know if you guys have that there, but I'm one of those people that, I have alcoholism, and I have, some real mental illness, and I could probably qualify to be selling the paper in one of those places. And what happened to me is that I had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I met a guy in a meeting who said, basically, who was properly armed with the facts about himself and said, hey man, your problem is not alcohol, your problem is you. And, if you listen to me, then, and let me coach you through these steps, then you will have a spiritual awakening and you'll no longer be thirsty for alcohol. And at that point, I was thirsty for alcohol, but I think I was more thirsty for suicide. I think there's a lot of people here who relate that untreated alcoholism demands to be treated, whether it's treated with alcohol or something else. We've heard that said a bunch of times, right? So, and I told this guy, man, I have a real problem with the God thing. And by that time, I had studied all kind of stuff and I was so arrogant and so full of it. And, I'd eaten acid and done Course in Miracles and done the fundamentalist stuff and been a TV toucher, and I'd done all that stuff. I'd been prayed over in tongues while I was high on trucker pills one time, and they were exorcising the demon. I mean, I had all this crazy shit happen. I built sweat lodges. I thought I had meditated, I thought I was a real spiritually evolved guy, but I also behind that knew that I didn't really believe that there is a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity, because I thought he would have done it already or he was pissed at me. And this guy encouraged me to set aside everything I think I know for an open mind and open heart. And he was also a guy that, really revered a lot of the guys in the Fellowship of the Spirit, Don P., several other people, like he took me to Don Pritt's retreats. And one of the things he said is, you don't have to have your mind figured out about the God thing. You can borrow mine. It works for me. Just borrow mine. He had this little kind of anecdotal type deal, right? Where you can borrow my God, it works for me. So in that, I lived my life up until that point. Everything was dictated by what I thought and what I felt. That determined my reality. My mind and my emotions, I was just glued to them. I have a really crazy story. There's a lot of drama in that, but I don't want to use my time for that. I want to use my time for this. So, a lot of times when we ask people to speak at these meetings, they're like, well, what do you want me to talk about? Like what are we here to talk about? And this essay, for me, like a lot of times when we give an AA pitch, we talk about what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now. We have a narrative arc, right? We talk about what happened. I worked the steps. I had a spiritual awakening. I got so sobered. I no longer have the mental obsession for beverage alcohol anymore, and a lot of other benefits come with that too, right? But it's almost like those rom-com movies where, the guy meets the girl in the airport and they make out and all of a sudden the credits roll up, right? But we don't know what happens after the credits. We don't know when when they both have a bad stomach virus and 3 kids and they're going through some financial trouble and it's 10 years later and all the sizzle's worn out of that, like what does that look like? So for me, I definitely had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. I did everything this man said to do. I went through the big book. I even had a bad episode of this OCD stuff. I checked myself into a psychiatric ward for the last time for like 7 days. I really felt discouraged about that. I wanted to kill myself. And, I was married to this woman that I really had a harsh relationship with, because I had built all this stuff up as a teenager with self-will and alcoholism, and I had made a mess. And I did the stuff that he told me to do. I went through the inventory. I did the step work at the best pass that I could do. And the real journey for me happened probably at about 1.5 years sober. I was working at a treatment center for adolescents, and one part about Bill's letter, when he talks about emotional sobriety, I always got irritated about that term. Like I wish they'd have titled the letter something different, because I think that it almost looks like an indictment. Well, we have a special sect of AA, and how is your emotional sobriety? And I don't think that it's an indictment. I think it's a condition. When it says emotional sobriety, I think it's saying to me, what's it like inside right now? What's underneath the hood? I think it's directly synonymous with our spiritual condition. And I think the part in that letter where it says many AA oldsters who have put our AA booze cure to severe but successful test still find they often lack emotional sobriety. And I think a lot of people hide it. I think there's a lot of people who get isolated off and have some sobriety, and they start, they've gone through the steps, they've worked with some sponsees, and somehow, and I'll repeat a lot of stuff that I've repeated over the years, and everything I've heard that's worth a nickel has been told me by somebody else. Harry Tebow talked about how the recuperative power of the alcoholic ego would be comic if it weren't so tragic. So at a year and a half sober, that woman and I got divorced. I was 20 years old. I was working at an adolescent treatment center, and I drove up, and I drove by this neighborhood in a real prominent area of Nashville. And there was this cool little car dealership that had this Highline, all these Highline European cars, all these fancy cars. And I go to that place and I asked them for a job. I kind of got inspired to go, and they said, we're not going to hire any salespeople. We'll hire a lot manager. So I took the job because it said I would, that I could be a lot manager. And I could tell my mom that my job title had the word manager in it. You know what I mean? And so I started working, and basically was washing and moving these cars. And I needed something that was low key because I was working the night shift on this adolescent ward, and I needed something that was low key. I was stressed out. I had blown this marriage up. I didn't really blown it up, but it was just bad. It was a really hurtful thing to go through a divorce with a young child, right? It just sucks. I don't know if anybody's ever been through that in sobriety, but it's really hard to split your time up with your child. And I heard a lot of, my sponsor at the time give me a lot of speaker tapes, and one of the speaker tapes I heard is that this guy's sponsor told him, if you're the first guy to come to a job and the last guy to leave, don't ask what they're going to pay you. You just go at it with all you've got in it. And Chuck C, I also fell in love with AA speaker tapes. I used to listen to so many of these. These people would rock me to sleep, and they would give me all this hope. I'd hear about all these people that had these terrible things that happened to them, but they kept up with AA and they kept in it. And one of the guys that I really fell in love with at the time was a guy named Chuck C. And Chuck C would often say, whatever you give your entire attention and whatever you give your entire attention, time, and trust to will flourish. Like he just gave his entire, he gave it to it like he wasn't getting paid, like it was a service position. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard, if you haven't heard or the Chuck C's lectures on A New Pair of Glasses or read that book, that's it's added a lot to me. So whatever you give your time, attention, and love to, your entire time, attention, and love to. So I gave my time, attention, and love to that job, right? And when I went there, I met this guy that was a really good looking guy. And I say this all the time in the talk, but this is pretty much how my brain worked. He was really handsome. He drove a Bentley. He had a nice condo in a really nice area of town. And I thought, I want to be like this guy. These guys are all, they're making a lot of money. And I felt like that I was for lack of a better word, a fuck up. Deeply, I had that belief that was all I was ever going to be. Right. I wasn't good in school. I didn't pay attention. I was always in trouble. I was always having to be the class clown. I was always, I'm the person that knocked up a girl in rehab school. You know what I mean? Like a rehab high school for kids who are in rehab, knocked her up, then got drunk again. That's the kind of dude I am. I will fuck it up if it can be messed up. Excuse my French. So I'm just being honest. And I started following these tapes, and I just gave my entire attention and love to this job. And next thing you know, I started selling cars. Next thing you know, I started managing that place. And next thing you know, they gave me a car, and they would give me these big wads of cash, like here you go. And I remember starting to feel like in this letter, it talks about, perfect approval, perfect security. By this time I'm going to the AA house, I've been sober, different AA meetings. I've been sober for, by this time, a couple years. It's not 30 days anymore. And I get this money, and all of a sudden I'm driving a really nice car, and all my friends that are in college aren't making near the money that I'm making by 2 or 3 years into this. And then I'm running the whole place. I've got a condo in Green Hills. I've got a South American girlfriend, just like the guy that mentors me. And all of a sudden I think to myself in this place, God, man, look what I can do. You know what I'm saying? And, Richard Rohr talks about the deep father wound that a lot of men carry with them. And I remember one of my sisters was crazy. And she had 3 kids in the first one in high school. She was a complete nut job. My dad had to support her. And man, my dad was gone for a good portion of my earlier childhood. And one of the things I can remember is I always really wanted my dad to I really wanted my dad to give a shit about me. I really wanted to make him proud, right? I mean, my mom could be the one who's always trying to help me and do all that stuff, but my dad was the one that I really wanted the nod from. So I got this condo, and I remember he never came. He came to visit every so often, but this time he came to visit, and I made it a point I was going to pick him. I picked him up in a Porsche, and I bring him back to this condo, and I get inside this thing, and he didn't care. You could tell when he left the visit, he didn't care. It wasn't he was being a jerk. He just didn't care one way or another. It just wasn't his thing. He didn't really care about the car. He didn't really care about the condo. And what I was basically trying to show him is, look, I'm not a fuck up anymore. Look at me. I've arrived. Look, I have some value. I have something that I can contribute. There is some worth to me. And, I've always been in love with Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've always been in love with the people because I relate. And, Mary Thayer always talks about there's an energy, or there's a warmth, there's a safety to that room, and at that point I went through a really kind of superficial period of time. But I remember when he left that condo, I actually said this out loud in the foyer. I was like, why did you even buy this? And I didn't say it like that. I said, why'd you buy this effing thing? I'm gonna try and spare my use of the F word, but why did you buy this effing thing? You didn't even like this that much. Why did you buy this? And my heart sunk a little bit when he left. It was like, man, look, there's a documentary on happiness on Netflix, and this guy, I forgot who it was the guy that wrote Liar, Liar, and Dumb and Dumber and all that kind of stuff. And he talked about how, he finally got this really nice house in Malibu. And as soon as the movers, he had written and directed several of these movies. And as soon as the door shut and the furniture guys were done delivering the furniture at his place in Malibu, all of a sudden his heart sank into this place of depression, where he was like, so this is it? This is what it's like to have a lot of money. I thought money, my whole delusion was I thought money would solve money problems, right? And then I thought romance would solve romance problems. And then my whole life I was like, man, you need to have a good woman. You need to engineer a life that people want to like. So I thought, what do I really, my brain told me, my soul said, if you asked me at any point in my life, what was the most valuable part of my life, I would have told you, and what I worshiped. We talk about the God of reason versus the great reality. What I worshiped, I would have told you, I worship Jesus. I love God. I'm a big fan of God. I believe in serving God and my fellows. If you looked at my actions, or you followed me around with a camera, or you were able to broadcast what was going on in my head, I thought about having a relationship, having money, getting approval from people, getting nods in an AA meeting, making people laugh, making people like me, looking spiritual, feeling like I look spiritual. By that time, I started having some sponsees, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not gonna say that it was all bad. None of it was authentic, but I am gonna say that I grew up in AA, and somewhere midway through that time period when I was, I think it was 25 or 26 years old, I dated I'd been in a couple long-term relationships, but this time I met a woman, and I thought to myself, God, she looks the part at that time. She looks like I think I would like her. You know what I mean? Have you ever been there? I met her at this swanky sushi place in town, and we were down there, and I go, God, that woman looks like she would be somebody that I would like. And somehow we got hooked up a couple months later, and we ended up in one of those, 2 ticks, no dog relationship kind of things. And it was just I remember asking her, I said, I'm sober, I don't drink. And she goes, I said, but I don't care if you drink. And she was like, well, I drink some, and people in my family drink. She drank a lot. She partied a lot. That was what she liked to do. And I said, well, that's cool. I'm spiritual enough for the both of us, pretty much, in my head. I thought, well, this is going to be okay. Because I don't need to steal any vicarious pleasure from the atmosphere, but I have good intentions here. If she likes to drink, she likes to drink. I will tell you that I've married 3 alcoholics. The last one's sober, and a lot of people who talk about this being a family disease, I qualify for about 127 different 12-step programs. For tonight, I'm going to probably keep the relevance to 2. And I worked the big book. I worked through the steps in the big book as a solution for both of them. But so I get married to this woman, I'm sorry, I didn't get married. First of all, I knew I shouldn't. There's something inside me that said, "Man, this is not cool." Like I was dating this person. You ever been around that where you just keep dating them and you're like, "Man, this is not cool." It looked cool. It felt kind of passionate. It looked fun, but inside I felt this anxiety about it all the time. Like I had to be somebody else. And I remember I was kind of praying about it one day, and I said, God, if it's your will for me to stay in this relationship, of course, I'm always, if it's your will for me to stay in this relationship, let me stay in it. And if it's your will for me, give me the strength to leave it, right? And my real fear was that this girl partied a lot and had a lot of fun, and I was worried that she was going to, maybe break up with me and hook up with a couple of my friends, and it was going to make me feel really bad, all that kind of stuff. And she was really popular around town, and it was going to hurt my feelings. I wasn't going to be able to take it. If I'm really brutally honest, I was afraid that was what was going to happen. It was going to hurt my ego. And I'll tell you, you can threaten me with a lot of things, but nothing scares me more than threat of embarrassment. So, so I remember I was praying about that. And one night I came home and I thought we were about to break up because I just started saying that prayer. And I thought we were about to break up. And she said, "Can you come inside?" She'd called me a couple of times, said, "I really need to talk to you in person." And I came inside. And I thought, oh yeah, we're definitely breaking up, so this is God telling me that she's going to be gone. And she had 3 positive pregnancy tests on the counter, and I almost fainted. I was like, dude, you did it again? Seriously, again? You had this one kid with an alcoholic, and now you bring this other kid. And then I almost fainted, but then I just said, you know what, I'm going to give my entire attention and love to this thing. And my daughter was born, and she is one of the loves of my life. I can't tell you how much I love this little girl, like but so I'll fast forward the tape a little bit. I went back and forth, and I ended up opening up a dealership with one of the guys that owned this particular dealership downtown. And there were a lot of things that were kind of back and forth. And then it was during the 2008 thing happened. And everybody was underwater in their houses. So I was underwater in my condo, but I wanted to move to this other area of town. And so my wife's parents said they were moving to Chicago. Would I take over their place because they were underwater? So it was kind of a win-win situation. And I ended up leasing this bigger house, and there's people all there all the time partying, this, that, and the other. And I'm sponsoring, 20 guys at a time, because somehow now I've gotten into AA. And I'm sponsoring a million people, right? Like, and I know that they need me. So I'm sponsoring them. And I really, I stopped paying attention to all the stuff I did in the first of that relationship. I kind of stopped paying attention to, because I was just, this person really kind of bored me. We put up with each other. We didn't fight. We just, had a good kind of a mutually friendly relationship where, we knew kind of what each other's job description was. And she would occasionally complain that she wasn't getting enough attention. But I just thought that was just part of it, and I was working hard, this, that, and the other. Well, somehow I remember I managed to get myself in more debt than I'd ever been in my entire life. Like I took out some loans to start this business and used them to pay for the upstart of it, used it to close out this other thing that I was doing. And, I remember that slowly, somehow, something started to kind of deteriorate in me, and it looked like this business was. It looked like that this business was successful, but I wasn't ever going to be able to catch up with the debt that I had. I had $120,000 of unsecured debt over my head, and at that point, I was making a couple $100,000 a year, and my expenses were every bit of a couple $100,000 a year. And I was always, a lot of it was the surface in that debt. And I remember I started having these feelings like a hypocrite in AA. I got a lot of relief from AA, but at the same time, I was terrified about that. And I had that shameful secret that I carried around all this debt, right? And then I was kind of in this dishonest relationship. But one night, this woman, and I remember, I've said this before, man. I mean, I was in the shower fantasizing about killing myself, because what am I going to do? Drink? I'm not going to drink. I just want to get it over with. Like, I have a mind that will always steer me into, I don't drift into healthy shit. I don't drift into healthy stuff, and And I'm in the shower and I'm sitting there and I'm drifting into suicide. My brain goes, yeah, but you don't have that. You haven't gotten the life insurance clause for suicide, right? Like life insurance does not cover suicide the first year. You have to up your life insurance policy and then not commit suicide for a year. So you better do that just in case you need to commit suicide in a year or two, and make sure you get a good suicide clause in whatever insurance policy you bump it up to. And you guys don't need to act like none of y'all have ever thought about that. Come on. Everybody's thought about the suicide clause. And this woman walks in one day and says, she looked really disengaged. And she says, I don't love you. Or, basically, she had been acting weird for a couple of days. And I said, sooner or later, we're going to have to talk. And, it was this big dramatic scene where, I got up to go to the bathroom. And she's sitting at the vanity. And we had a big bathroom at the time. And I turned around and I kept saying, what's wrong? Are you okay? Is anything wrong? She goes, nothing's wrong. Nothing. And then I go, finally I looked around. I said, sooner or later, we're going to have to talk about this. Like, did I do something to piss you off? You need to say it. She goes, well, we should have talked a long time ago. And, and then something told me that, like, what she was saying was that she was, I knew what was happening. She was getting ready to pull the pin on this grenade. I knew what she was working up the strength to do. And something was going on that I couldn't figure out. And she pulls the pin. And so I turned around and I said, are you trying to say that you want a divorce? Because I just don't know right now. I just don't know. And immediately what my mind thought are, what are people going to think of me? What are these people that I sponsor going to think? I had a guy who asked me to marry him. I was supposed to marry this couple. They're like, hey, we don't really belong to a church. Would you like to marry us? Can you imagine the ego? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll marry you. I'll get it. I'm sure there's plenty of people who've married people, but I was like, yeah, sure, I'll get ordained. So I'm actually ordained. I married 4 people. During my divorce, I married 4 people. And so what ended up happening is she left. My best friend who I started this company, one of my good friends I had started this company with, and my other 2 partners who were friends of mine, they had a falling out, and one of them sued all of us. We had to fire him. He sued us all. And we didn't have to fire him, but we fired him, and he sued us all. And then I had all this money in debt, and I was still working for the company, but I was doing it. I was doing the role that I performed for that one store. And I said, I'm going to sell out my interest to you and blah, blah, blah. And I paid off some of that debt, but it just seemed like it was never going to get right. And I was at this point at 15 years sober where I was at a jumping off point. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just like, hey man, stuff in my life's just not going great. Either these people in AA are full of shit, but are deep inside. Maybe I'm just one of those people that's just deeply flawed. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a little bit more screwed up. And I remember I started listening to Charlie P tapes. And Charlie P, of course, I've got to, if we're going to do a little cocaine, I want to freebase it. I'm just making that up. But, I want to go the hard addict. And so Charlie P, I knew that Charlie P's mentor was Mark Houston. And then I remembered that Mark Houston talked a lot about Don P. And then I was like, man, I really love this guy, so I started listening to a lot of Don P because I want to go to the source, I want to get it in its richest, most uncontaminated form, because I was in a lot of pain. I was scared about money all the time. I was pissed off at relationships. I felt like I was a failure at life. My dream had gone to shit. I was 33 years sober with 2 baby mamas. I was balding, and I was frustrated at my life. And, I could give a pretty good AA talk. I was given the annual dinner AA talk at, the whole district or whatever. So that was kind of cool. But other than that, I was falling apart. And I remember I got with Tom and I said, hey man, I knew this guy, Tom, and I knew that he knew Don and that he had worked with him some. And I said, hey man, will you help me work the steps? Can we work through the book together like this? This is long and short of it. And we started working through the book, and I went through. And all of a sudden, what was it? Not Clint Hodges, the other guy that doesn't talk a lot, that's out of Colorado. I'm with Bob Olson. But was it like Bob Olson that talked about, you brought this up where he said, we were going through 63, and we talked about how, first of all, I went through and I found out that, that I was still an alcoholic, that I couldn't drink anymore, and that I was at the jumping off place. I knew loneliness such as few do. I knew I couldn't pick up a drink. I knew that all it does, people in my life people in my lineage, in my family, like me, they pick up a drink again and it just crumbles apart. So I knew that one, and I didn't want to put my family and my children through that pain, right? But I did often fantasize about suicide. I was often really screwed up, and my life was completely unmanageable by me. And at that point, my life was not unmanageable because of my powerlessness over alcohol. My life was unmanageable, and alcohol at one time served as a decent anesthetic for that. But now I needed something stronger. And Tom and I went back to the book, and one of the things that was so powerful was, and I'm going to say this story a little bit, like, God comes to me. I'm always afraid of God. The God of my understanding, the conception of my God, was it Blaise Pascal? Keith Lewis used to recite this all the time. He said, God created man in his own image, and unfortunately, man returned the favor. Right. And I had this belief that, there was something wrong with me and that God wouldn't show up. And God has shown up for me all over my life. I can tell you miracle stories. I could give a great AA talk in 15 years and make it sound like, that before, middle, and end, and have the end go, the credits go up, and it'd be a weepy thing. And I'm here and present for my daughter, and I'm spiritual, and I sponsor a lot of guys, and I believe in giving, not taking, and yada, yada, yada. But what ended up happening is I was still falling apart on the inside. And what I did is I just said, and I remember this letter in this meeting that I used to go to where they read this a lot. But one of the things that used to started to give me some relief was I would read this, and I was working through the steps of Tom. And one of the things he came up with was, what are 4 or 5 things that you've been unwilling to give up for a better relationship with God? And, we talk about the act of surrender as if, and it's said this a lot, like, oh, I'm capable of surrendering. I think what happens is I like to think I'm in control of that, but everybody who's been there knows that you get surrendered. And my ability to work on the steps my ability to work with something through the steps comes as a direct result of me being surrendered in that area. Does that make sense? Like with money or relationships or approval or any of that stuff, I get surrendered in that area where I come to the failure and run up against the failure of my own self-will in that, And so I brought these things up, and Tom, said, why don't you imagine yourself putting these things on the altar? What have you been unwilling to put up on the altar? And I put them up there. One of the things had been relationships. One of the things had been money. What people thought of me with this job. I hated the job I was in. That job had become miserable, and I was terrified to get out of it. And I was addicted to the money. I had to make the money. That was the only place a guy who has limited education could make, the kind of money that I was making. And at that point, I was disgusted with it. And I was disgusted with everybody in there. And I was completely burnt out with it. And I ended up just putting all these things. I just said, mentally, I took the posture of putting all these things on the altar. I think it's really funny that, if you really think about it, like I'm one of 7.7 billion people that live on a 44.5 billion year old rock that is 97 million miles away from a gigantic ball of heated gas and hydrogen. And I think that I'm doing something. Like, I think I have the power to surrender something. Like, we're hurling through space at 67,000 miles an hour. And I think that I'm going to give the creative architect of this universe, who I correctly perceive, all these areas of my life, which, Bill Cleveland talks about that. It's such a grandiose idea, right? Like, it's a total grandiose idea. But I went in and I basically said, I went all in with the little chips that I had left. And I just said, look, I'm tired. I'm real tired of this. And I went back through the steps with Tom, and we went back to this inventory, and I began to see where, with good intentions, I'll tell the story, a couple of days before Tom and I met on this, or a couple of weeks, this guy had asked me to meet. He said, can you meet with this kid? And I said, sure. And I go, why do you want me to meet with him? And he says, well, he's addicted to, he drinks, he's on Suboxone, and he's on all this other stuff. And he's not sure if he wants to get sober, but he just wants to meet up with somebody who's been sober for a little while. Would you meet him? And I said, sure. Meet me at this one place in East Nashville called Dose, which I never go to, but I was just happened to be in that area of town. And I met him one night, and I'm looking at this guy right in the eyes, and he's telling me how, he has a job and he has to work, and he doesn't think he can lay the stuff down to go to detox. I'm like, I can't really do anything with you. Like, my area of expertise is once abstinence is started, like after detox, I can help you through this part. but we do probably need to go to detox because I don't see how we're going to do it with me. He had a whole slew of issues. And he looked at me and he was telling me how important his job was and how important his daughter was to him. And his eyes, he looked how important his daughter was to him. And I knew what he was crying about. I said, I want you to just go home and consider this. And if you decide you want to do this, then I'll help you find a detox and we can do it. Well, these tears started falling down from his face, right? And I knew that he said, he's like, man, I got to work. I can't take off. And I said, well, you consider that. And I left. I didn't think anything about it, right? Well, then meanwhile, Tom gives me the considerations and I ask him, he lives in East Nashville and he comes, why don't you meet me this morning? And it just snowed. So it was really kind of, it was really scenic and kind of dramatic for me because I showed up in the morning and we're at the exact same coffee shop. And next thing you know, he's asking me what I've been unwilling to give up for a better relationship with God. And I realized I'm sitting at the exact same table that me and that guy were, except I'm on the other end. And I start to tear up because I haven't been willing to let go of what I think people are going to think of me if I quit this job, or if I do this other stuff, or if I let these things go, or if I really go all in on this area of my life. All these dependencies are running my life. My mind and my feelings are running my life. If I think God's not there, then that means he's not there. If I don't feel the presence of God, then he's not there. If I think God's an asshole, then all of a sudden that makes him an asshole. And none of that makes any sense, right? It makes no sense. And what I found out piece by piece and what always keeps showing up is that God is not an asshole. God is, there's always this gentle, when I go all in, I went all in on this stuff. I said, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I left that job on really good terms. I started contract buying cars for a good friend of mine that I met in the program in Seattle. We became really close. He might be on here tonight. And the first weekend I went to go visit him, I had no money. I got on a plane, I quit my job and I said, hey, and they were going to fire me at the same time because I was already not doing really well. I was pretty pissed at them and a lot of things had happened and it was time for me to go anyway. And so I kept the car there and I had $6,000 in money that I had put aside for income tax I needed. And that's all the money I had. And I got on this plane and I went to this place and I started working for this dude. And that weekend, when I went to the company, he said, hey man, there's a big AA retreat going down. And Kenny D was speaking at that AA retreat, right? Like the weekend that happened. So I go to this retreat with Kenny Downs. I don't know if you guys don't know him. He's a beautiful human being. Everything in my life started to fit. All these pieces started to fit. Eventually, my life got really, really good. And there's a lot of things that I can't completely, don't have time to go into. But as I let go of what I thought I needed for the money thing, I went back through some old amends too, because it turns out I had some credit cards that I co-signed with my mom that hadn't paid off. I went through every bit of the amends stuff with Tom. Like he was like, let's go through that. Why are you paying that off? How's that going? I started paying that stuff off. And next thing you know, I get this weird intuition. Kurt always talks about, where it says, suddenly I realized, that revelatory experience that happens, that intuition. One day I'm just chilling and this thought comes, why don't you buy the business that you started at, that place over on Belle Meade? Why don't you buy that? They go, well, it's not for sale. And, and I thought that's a ridiculous idea, but I'll call this guy that owns it that, had fired me a couple months prior and ask him if he wants to sell it to me. But the only thing is I didn't have any money either. Right. And all these doors just kept opening and kept opening and kept opening. I just try to stay present, do the next right thing. I remember I called Tom, like, do you think this is crazy? He's like, I don't think it's crazy. And I ended up partnering with this guy that was one of my best friends and mentors, a customer I sold a car to when I was 23. And we opened up that business several years ago. And it's been extremely prosperous, more than I ever thought. And I paid off that 100,000, whatever money I had left on that debt. I started paying towards it. And all of a sudden, boom, I paid 60,000 of it off in 2 months. And during that pay, it was, and things in my life really changed. But, I had already given up. I remember Lauren and I had started seeing each other and I had already, and I was in a different relationship prior to that we kind of kept breaking up. One of the things was that they weren't ready for stepkids or any of that kind of stuff. And it was just kind of a fling that had lasted too long and we both liked each other and yada, yada. And something in me said, hey man, if you ever want to have a meaningful relationship with somebody, you need to create space for that. You're not giving yourself any space for that. And, we had a good parting and next thing you know, If you've ever met my wife, she is a bottle rocket and a lot of fun. And so, you know, she comes into my life. This new thing comes into my life. And one of our principles is we want to give 10% of our earnings to God, or like to honor God and that sort of thing. So we're able to send a lot of guys through treatment. You know, we've done a lot of really cool stuff. You know, my life is, I sponsor a lot of men. And, you know, every day today, my inner life, sometimes my inner life's so good, I can't feel like I can't give a talk worth a shit anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I don't even really feel like talking. I mean, I can make myself talk because I kind of still want people to like me because I still want to be a little relevant. But it's like I could just sit here and zone out and listen to somebody for the whole time. And I used to not be able to do that. I had to always, you know, I always had to go with what I thought, felt, and believed. And I always had to have struggle to the top of the heap for some relevance. I wanted to be significant. You know, I've been going to boarding school since 7th grade. And I always wanted the grown-ups to like me. And what I found is it's just like, you know, Chuck C always said, what you're looking for, you're looking with, right? Like there's that place where, you know, on 60 through 63, am I not an actor who's trying to run the whole show? Am I not, you know, and I'm not a victim of the delusion that I can wrestle satisfaction, happiness out of this world if only I manage it well, right? Well, once you've gotten a lot of that stuff and you realize that you're still restless, irritable, discontent, that's a real shitty place to be. It's even worse when you don't get it and you're just whining about it all the time, right? You feel all entitled to it. So what happened for me is, you know, like Chuck C always talked about, man, as soon as I stopped as soon as I stopped trying to get rich, I got rich. Like it just wasn't important to me anymore. And then it just happened. And this happened. And this happened. And, you know, my point tonight in all of this was, my point in all of this was to say that when I can put these dependencies on the altar and let them go, when I can get, you know, for me, a lot of people have talked about this, and a guy that I really enjoy, and he talked about this, you know, the process of spiritual growth is a process of subtraction, not addition, right? And what happens is I start letting go of these false beliefs and false dependencies. And next thing you know, I'm living an authentic life, and I'm living in the present moment. And one of the things that, you know, I started boxing about 6 months ago, just for fun. I'm 40 something. I started boxing. I really kind of enjoyed it. And then I got this boxing trainer, and now we hit each other and all kind of crazy stuff. And it's kind of weird to some people who don't get it, but I like doing hot yoga and boxing for my exercise because it keeps me occupied mentally. And one of the things is like, I really had a fun time hitting the heavy bag and all that kind of stuff. But then you start getting hit. Like if you start sparring with people, you get hit, you know, and I was freaked out when that first started happening. Like your adrenaline gets pumping and all this kind of stuff. And I used to like clinch. Like I had this clinch, or I would get anxious and I would clinch. And one of the things that, you know, my spiritual walk continues to teach me, and, you know, I think what's really important for me is that I meditate every morning. I meditate every morning. I do evening review every morning. I work with several alcoholics. I do a lot of things that keep me in the rails because you know, it's like Steve, a good friend of ours, Steve A, used to say, all day long, I have a grenade in my pocket and I'm just waiting to roll it out somewhere. You know what I mean? And I can really roll a grenade out. I can take a perfectly good family dinner and blow that shit up. You know what I'm saying? If I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, I'm looking for somewhere to put it on. And disturbed people always find more disturbances. Did you ever realize that? The more disturbed you are, the more disturbable you are. But when I'm at peace and I'm centered in the great reality, not the garbage in my brain, but I'm in that flow of the great reality, all these things come to me in different ways that I never thought were possible, right? You know, they start to come, and I can actually enjoy life. And one of the things I realized that I did all the time is I was always anticipating danger. I was always clinching. And in boxing now, you know, you got to kind of relax. You get hit. Now it's so different. Like now I get hit and I'm like, oh, that feels good. That's getting us warmed up, you know? I mean, I'm not getting like, you know, completely slammed. But one of the things that I used to do through life all the time is I would have a disturbing thought. This OCD would come up And I'll go, oh God, I'm such a bad person for having that. Or, oh, I got to really figure that out, or, oh, whatever. And now I can sit back and observe it, let it flow through me, relax my shoulders, relax my jaw, breathe and go, oh, that's interesting. And I don't have to participate in it. It's just like Don P used to say, thoughts are like vagrants. If you invite them in for dinner, they'll rob you of everything you have. You just wave at them and let them pass through, they'll just pass through. And, I'll say a couple more things and I'm going to shut up. But, this OCD thing is something that it's a real thing. It's a real, I've had to call Tom and say, hey man, I had this weird, don't you think this is kind of crazy? And he's like, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I'm like, okay, good. Just making sure that sounds great. It's not something that I bring up with everybody, but I bring it up here because, it's really it's really irritated me in my life. And it's something that like, you can do a PET scan of somebody's brain and you can see somebody who has this and somebody who doesn't. It acts differently, right? Like it's a whole nother kettle of fish. And I remember that when I was young, when I was like a year and a half sober, I was sitting at Mont Eagle and I went on this retreat with Don P. And I always looked at these guys who were spiritual. And I always thought, God, man, I really thought if you were 10 years sober and you wore kind of flowy clothes that you were probably really sober, like you're really spiritual, And I thought if you made $100,000 a year, then you were like a big deal and you didn't worry about anything. Right. And if you were old and married that, and you looked happy, you probably were happy. That's what I thought. Right. And so I looked at Don, and anything a guy like that says is gospel. Because if somebody says this guy said this and this guy said this and this guy said this, and I've told the story a couple of times, but he looked at me one day, or I said, man, can I borrow you for a minute? And this was not a huge retreat. There's probably 20 something dudes there. And we were sitting on this bench outside of Swanee, looking over this huge, this cliff on Lookout Mountain that, it looks over a valley, but you're on top of this cliff or hill or whatever. And I remember I looked at him and I really wanted to know, like, I knew I was a little different than other people. And I said, Don, I have these problems. I have this OCD garbage. I've worked the steps. I do the stuff out of the big book. Like, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Like, do you think I'm really fucked up? Do you think I'll ever get better? Like, that's the truth of probably what I said to him at the time. And, he had a couple fingers missing, and he'd always do this thing where he sat and he would go, take a deep breath. And he would go to his inner garden or whatever, and he'd come out with like something, and he turned around at me with those eyes and he took a deep breath and he said, I think one day you're going to be a help to a lot of people. And one day, I was telling Tom this, one day I was at this rehab center that I didn't want to go to because it was, it's just one that I actually was kind of irritated that they asked me. I thought, well, this is one of those places that's sold out to one of those big corporate places. And they just depend on AA to give them all the good shit, and they don't deserve the good AA. But I'm going to say yes and go. And I don't know why the hell I agreed to do this, but I'm going to do it. And it was a long drive from where I was, and I was busy. I didn't feel like driving all the way out to Dixon. It wasn't Discovery Place, but it was another place. I didn't feel like driving all the way out to this one place. And I was irritated, and I got in there, and before I went into that place, I was tired, and I said, God, if I'm going to do anything here, if I got anything, you're going to have to help me with this. And somehow I was able to open up about that stuff, that OCD stuff, and some of that stuff that was going on in me, and it was a cool talk. It was one of those things where it all worked out and all the pieces fit. You felt like, hey man, this is a good talk. And people participated. And at the end, this farmer guy who was older came up to me in overalls, and he said, man, I've really been having this problem with this kind of thing. And that happens to me a lot, but this time, all of a sudden, this visualization of me sitting on top of that mountain, like, was right there. Like, I was on this bench with Don, and I saw him say that to me, like, right in that moment, and there's moments like that just, I see how important and real this stuff really is. The great reality shows up all over my life all the time. I'm a guy that has problems and debates theology all the day long. And, God hooked me up with Chris, and we have a lot of fun with that. And, I have, I wanted to get to a couple points. But I think that, Kurt talked about this, and there's a letter from Carl Jung that Bill Wilson wrote Carl Jung to talk about Roland Hazard, right? And most people have read that transcript. And then Carl Jung wrote him back. He wrote him to thank him for what he said to Roland Hazard. And in that letter, he thanked Bill and said, man, I often wonder what happened to Roland, what happened with that guy. And he said, his quote was, his craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God, right? And there's always that, Chuck C used to say, what you're looking for, you're looking with. And what I thought was that place of wholeness and well-being and spiritual completeness where I can really give, because a lot of times when I'm giving and expecting to receive, that's not giving, that's manipulation. That's me trying to be people pleasing, and that's me trying to run the show so that I get what I want, right? When that woman told me she wanted a divorce, I automatically thought, Jesus Christ, what are people going to think? Holy shit, you're probably not ever going to get laid or married again. You got to patch this together, patch this up, fix it, because you at least need to get hair plugs or something by June. Plus, you'll have more money and you won't be in these negotiations and your business partners won't be thinking this stuff. And you need to get through this wedding that you were marrying this person. And it had nothing to do with the relationship. It was, what are people going to think about me? That's the whole thing. And, Tom, thank God I have a sponsor that tells me things like, true freedom is when there's nothing left to impress. Like, puts that up in there. True freedom is there's nobody left to impress. When can you walk in your truth? I've got a sponsor that'll get up and just, sometimes he'll tell his AA story and sometimes he'll talk about some other shit. You know what I mean? And he'll be like, I don't know, I just feel like talking about this now. And that's real. And what I like about the Fellowship of the Spirit is, when you go there, you have real people who are participating in their life with their direct step experience. It's not just some, let's all, shake hands and baby kiss and all that kind of stuff. The same 12 people that have been going on tour for 15 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, this is a different thing. It takes things to a different level. It's not necessarily like a celebrity culture, although we do admire a lot of people. The thing that really attracts me to it is the people that we admire will let you look under the hood when shit's going wrong and say, here's look at this. This is what it looks like to be 22 years sober and have a problem with your God concept. This is what it looks like to go through a divorce. This is what it looks like to do this. This is what it looks like when you run an engine on no oil. You know what I mean? And they'll sit there and hold that open. And there is a realness and integrity to that. And that's what Bill was doing in this letter. That's what Bill, I believe, was doing in this letter. It was originally not an essay. It was a letter written to a guy who had been struggling with depression. And Bill wrote this letter with 20-something years sober. And he was telling the guy, look, man, last autumn, depression almost took me to the cleaners. Here's the guy in Bill's story who talks about his step experience with Evie, who's had several step experiences. But he said, last autumn, depression almost took me to the cleaners. I began to think that I was in for another long, chronic spell. And then he tells him, he had to go all in again. His ego had rebuilt, basically. And he had to say, here are my dependencies. I had to let go of every dependency. And I had to exert every ounce of will and effort to let these things go. And the way that I do that is through working the steps. I continue to do that. But when it comes into my awareness that, hey, man, it's a scary thing. And Steve Lee always talks about this. It's a real scary thing to have your awareness supersede your willingness to do anything about a problem, right? Like when you're freaked out about money, you're freaked out about relationships, but your awareness is way superseded your willingness to do something about it. That's a shitty spot to be in. And I've been there. You know what I'm saying? And one of the best things that I ever hear about is that God's will is the best deal there is. That's what happens with this. When we find out it's God's will is the best deal there is. There really is a God. He is the great reality underlying the totality of everything, the great reality that's deep down within us. Christ said that if you listen to him, that he will put a living spring inside of you and you won't thirst anymore. That living spring is the presence of God inside of us. And the problem is it's obscured by pomp, calamity, and worship of other things. And that goes back to the God of reason versus the great reality. Anything that I can think up is an inadequate conception of God, right? The God of my experience is a lot different than the God of my internal creation. The God of my internal creation changes day by day and is weird, and there's all kind of shit that goes along with it. And thank God, the God like Kathy Heekin talks about, which we heard on this, was the God of my experience was way bigger than the God of my unlimited understanding. I'm pretty sure that I didn't talk about anything that I want to talk about tonight, and but I'm way over here. So been a lot better speakers than me that hadn't gone on this long. So thanks for putting up with me, and thanks for everybody participating in this meeting.
Sam, thank you so much for bringing all of yourself and for sharing. The way that we do this is I invite the speaker to call on a couple people, and then we'll open it up to anyone who would like to share. You can raise your hand, but let's start. Sam, is there anyone you want to hear from tonight?
You know, I'm gonna say I have to go with this. What about like Tom? I missed Tom and Juanita just because I talked about them a bunch.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you. Come on. Come on. He called you. She ran away.
I did not. Sam, that was great. You know,
I don't blame.
you really reminded me of this thing that we're doing on Tuesdays, which is on step 10, 11, and 12, what is it?
Unpopular
The unpopular
studies.
studies. And it's like you're talking about basically watching what we're up to, you know, and that's the hardest thing in the world to do, is watching what we're up to, being honest with ourselves about what's going on, you know, and bringing God into the equation. And right on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That was absolutely real. And what I kept thinking about was back when you were going to start that business and you had nothing and you were scared shitless, you know, all the time. And, but I mean, all you had was to trust God. There was nothing, you know, there was nowhere else to go, you know. And then, you know, what it looks like today. I mean, we talked about it last week when we were in Chattanooga, we talked about that. And it's just phenomenal. I mean, it's so great to watch that, you know what I mean? From an observer standpoint, you know, and to see that happen, you know, it just renews your faith, you know. And not that making a lot of money and all that, but just like, oh, ye of little faith, you know, I've got you, you know, you're safe and protected, you know, that kind of a thing. But, you know, with all the OCD stuff and all of that, I never really thought it was that weird, to tell you the truth. I mean, I really didn't, you know. I had sponsored some guys years ago that they could have hurt themselves really bad. One of them did, you know, kind of hurt himself. That was one of his MOs. And the other guy heard voices. And I won't go into a lot of that, but you know, I got a little freaked out about that. And I said to Don, you know, because he was alive then and he was my sponsor. And I said, you know, I've always heard that, you know, like attracts like and water seeks its own level. And, you know, these guys are pretty crazy. And I said, you think that, you know, I'm crazy and that's why they've come to me? And he said, no, that's not why. That's not why at all. And I said, well, why have they? I mean, they're kind of freaking me out, you know, which, I mean, when you heard some of the things they said, it was way beyond the stuff that you said to me. And he said, they know you're not afraid of them. And they find that attractive, you know, and I've never forgotten that, you know. And anyway, I mean, we're all in this boat together. And, you know, I don't know anybody that's not wackadoodle that's in our boat. You know, so anyway, but it's been what a ride, you know, to watch all this. It's just fabulous. You know, I love you a lot. You know, I do. That's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. I love you, man. What about Judy Lavezzi?
Sam, what a great talk. Thank you so much. It was good to catch tonight and be able to hear you, especially. It was a great treat. I love that. I love that stuff about some of what Tom just said. You know, I always sponsor bad girls. I just do. I get the ones that act out. And I love that because I guess at some level I understand them. My family would have comments on that. But I think there's a level of alcoholic thinking that really is understandable by us in ways that it might not relate quite so clearly to people who haven't gone through this process. And you articulated that, you know, and there is a God and there is something larger than me but I have to get past me in order to seek it. You know, I was thinking there's this line, I don't even know if I can quote it. I'm not very good at it, but something like, a man's reach should always exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? And I feel like that's a lot of what we do here is we reach, most alcoholics are reachers. But what you were describing is this inner kind of 6-step work of, I'm too broken, I'm a failure, I can't ever get to that, there's something wrong with me, I'm too whatever, I'm not enough of whatever. Those really deep qualities that set up the behavior that I take to my life. So for me, that looks always like a 6-step, that looking back into what's the software I got running, and it says, don't try that, you're gonna screw it up again. That kind of thing. It's like some kind of inner little hum of software that's always going on. So what do? I have to reach for something bigger and outside of myself. And you described that beautifully, because as long as I'm depending on me, broken or not broken, what if we just say, maybe we're all broken in some kinds of ways. So what? Let's get on with the business of recovery. Because nobody is here because they've got it all together completely. And I think your shirt looks like it should be linen. You could wear a linen shirt. It would look fabulous. It looks like linen. Your image is safe with us. So good to see you, Juanita and Tom and everybody else. It's a very special night to be able to be here. Thanks for letting me share. And I just want to say I love that talk about those dependencies, because they're the creepy crawlies in the middle of our stuff. But there's a solution. Thanks.
Why don't we open it up? We have plenty of people here. Open up for questions or comments or just to share.
Thanks, Sam. As folks raise your hand, I want to mention that I put in the chat a link to the Dropbox, and there's also a Facebook group called Emotional Sobriety Workshop. And I want to make sure people are able to find that. But if you'd like to share, you can just either unmute yourself or raise your hand.
You got to call on somebody. It looks like Abigail has her hand up.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, Abigail. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
You got to unmute yourself. You're getting there. But we can see your facial expression, but we can't hear what you're saying, Abigail. You got to unmute yourself.
Abigail, you're still muted.
Maybe we come back to her, Chris. Maybe she's in a. Oh, yeah, we can hear you now. Hey.
Oh, thank you. I was saying I'm embarrassed. I didn't know my hand was up. And that's probably God. Thank you. This is my first time actually speaking at this meeting. I've been coming for a few months now, and it's made a big difference in my life. And to hear the truth presented the way you had is actually very significant, because, you know, I like to hide little things from what's going on, and it's extremely important. And I actually have been driving this whole time. I just got back from a memorial service, and I'm finding that in my life I have all these stories and I believe them. And this particular, like, I knew people hated me at this memorial service, and I didn't really want to go, and blah-de-dee-blah-de-dee-blah, but it was really important, and I put myself aside, and I went. And I had people coming up to me and thanking me for something I had done for them 20 years ago, and somebody else who remembered being at my wedding, and what a difference it made in her life. Nobody hated me there. That's my stupid alcoholic brain that just, it's incredible what it's up to. Not just alcoholism. I don't know what that is in my head. I'm not sure it's OCD, but You know, I've got a brain that makes stuff up and I believe it. And I really want to bust those stories. And to have a day that was not filled with hate or politics or drama, but love and service was a gift beyond, well, you all know what it's like. Somehow coming to meetings, working the steps, coming to this meeting, it's all changing me. And I really appreciate it. And thank you for the courage of being so honest. We all, you know, you don't come to this meeting because you got a brain that's normal. Just saying. Thank you.
Thank you. What about Sarah
Thanks.
H? That was a sleeper. The first time I saw, I was like, man, she looks like a school teacher, and she's got just a, you know, gangster story.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a little bit of a gangster in all of us, I think. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah and I'm an alcoholic. Sam, that was phenomenal. I just love the way you kept weaving that part of what will people think into this, you know, because that was, you know, I didn't know that was one of my biggest fears until I got here, you know, and I wouldn't have been able to verbalize that, obviously. It was all about, you know, I have to be right, because if I'm not right, then I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, then there's something wrong with me. And if there's something wrong with me, oh my God, you won't like me. And oh my God, you know, I've screwed up my whole life. And, you know, and it's all about what do people think. And, you know, I have had like such a huge revelation recently, you know, about that particular fear, you know, and it comes from, it was one of the gifts that came from grief. And, you know, like some things have been happening in my life where God is suiting up and showing up in my life like I've never noticed before. And maybe it's just I wasn't paying enough attention or something, but you know, he always has and shown up in my life. But I've come to find out that you know, actually, most of the people I know think I'm pretty okay. They kind of like me, and I thought, who knew? Who knew that was possible? But I mean, recently, like, you know, simple things like I ran into I finally went somewhere for a weekend a couple of weeks ago, the first time since Mark passed that I went somewhere, and it was really hard because I was around people that, you know, normally are really glad to see me, and they were, but it was different because instead of saying, hey, Sarah, good to see you, it's, you know, we're really happy to see you. It was, hey, Sarah, we're so glad you made it this year. We're so glad you could be with us. You know, we've really been worried about you and caring about you, and we're so glad you're here. That was so different than, you know, what I had known. And then I come home to find that my neighbors have mowed my lawn. Even the drunk across the street came over and did some work here, you know. And then people showed up at my house a couple of weeks ago and started cleaning out part of my garage. You know, they got half my garage cleaned off, and they took stuff off of my property, you know, like scrap metal and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things that didn't get done for a long time, you know, when Mark was sick. And so they did that. And who knew? And then when they were leaving, and they came with cash and bought stuff too. And so who knew that, you know, at the end of the day, they're saying, hey, we got to come help Sarah today, and we all stayed sober. And, you know, and I thought, wow, you know, where did they get, how did they get to feel like that about me? And then one of the clinchers was I ran into one of my neighbors the other day. And I was in a different car because my car was in the shop, and I rolled down my window and she says, oh, I almost didn't recognize you. And she asked me, she says, how are you doing, Sarah? How are you doing? And, you know, like up until Mark was sick, I'd hardly ever, I mean, I love this lady, but I don't talk to her very often, or any of my other neighbors. We're kind of spread out here. And she said, you know what, Sarah, she says, you've got a lot of friends here. And she circled, you know, around the neighborhood. You've got a lot of friends here. There's a lot of people here rooting for you. And who knew? Who knew that? And that's God's grace that comes from Alcoholics Anonymous, like deep down in every man, woman, and child, you know. And that great reality was there, and is showing up and doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, and letting me know about it through other people. So thank you, Sam. You know, you really kind of shine some light on some things for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. We have time for one more. Teresa, would you share with us?
Hi, I'm Teresa, California, Lancaster. Thank you so very much, Sam, for everything that you said. You absolutely hit the nail on the head. At 12 years of sobriety, I felt, like either a drink or a bullet to the head was gonna, do it for me. And unfortunately, I took the the best of the two evils and I drank again. And after turning 21, something happened to me. Um, Something happened that I was longing for. And that was the reality that, I give two cares about what other people think about me. I've always thought that, not being enough was, the root of my evil. That's what kept me, in everlasting ignorance and drunk for so many, many years. And, the truth of the matter is that I am enough. I am enough exactly the way that I am, and I do need people in my life. I do need people to love me, but that doesn't mean that I need to go and seek that from other people's approval. I don't need to do that. I need to love myself first. And, the fortunate part is that I got to that point, of being able to see those things in myself, so that I could love on myself and be able to reciprocate that to other people. And that's where the light started to come on for me. Just this last year, when I turned 21, is when I found this emotional sobriety. And it was a real eye opening. I too love to listen to ex speakers, and that's how I found it. It wasn't by accident, but it was on purpose. God put this, this seminar into my life, and I listened to it, and it just started a whole new, new cycle of sobriety. So thank you so very much for what you said and your honesty and your candor and your truth. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Teresa, thank you so much. And I think we we're going to land just on time. So the way that we do this here is we take a moment, go into our innermost room and say a prayer of our choosing, and then we're going to come back and get to thank Sam for his share tonight. So let's take a moment for prayer.